The longest time, we've really been focused on symptoms and focused on the neurochemistry and treating the chemical imbalances in the brain with medications, treating our thought patterns and our behaviors with therapy. And what I find really exciting and encouraging is that what's coming down the pipeline right now is a treatment modality based on psychedelics, which actually takes into consideration psychospiritual healing and starts to put that front and center. So psychedelics are a very promising new line of medication in the mental health space. And we already have preliminary research that they can be helpful with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with depression, with end-of-life anxiety and angst, and even with substance issues. And part of the reason these treatments are effective, one, is that they're actually active at a particular receptor in the brain called the 5-HT2A receptor. So that's thought to be part of how they create this enduring antidepressant effect. They're also anti-inflammatory, many of them, and they increase the release of something called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. In other words, this is something that helps your brain with neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, which is really how our brains grow and change and adapt. And you can start to see how that has implications for mental health treatment when we think about how we get stuck in certain grooves or certain patterns, and there are certain entrenched behaviors or mental patterns that can then be changed. Things like obsessive compulsive disorder, anything related to trauma, to substance abuse. Often there are just certain patterns laid down that need a little bit of an opportunity for a shakeup to be changed so that we can crawl out of any kind of space where we get stuck. And so psychedelics create the conditions for our brain to be more plastic, to change. But there are these two pathways in how psychedelics are thought to be effective that have a particular focus on our psychospiritual healing. And one of them is their effect on something called the default mode network. And this is a couple regions in the brain, particularly around places like the posterior cingulate gyrus, where we kind of hang out geographically in our brain in these places when we're not doing something else, when we're not focused on a task. This is where we are at baseline. And it has a lot of that quality of this is me as an individual separate from others. And it also seems to be where we spend a lot of time thinking about the past and the future. This is where we future trip and dwell on the past rather than being in the present moment. And as we know, that's a big barrier for how we can be happy and whole and resilient in our lives. When the more we can actually be present in this moment, this helps keep us out of the dwelling on the past and the depressive, melancholic mindsets that can go with that, or future tripping and the anxiety and the anticipation and fear that comes with that. So the more we can spend time in the present moment, it's helpful. And what psychedelics achieve is they take us out of that future tripping, dwelling on the past mindset. They quiet the default mode network, even just for the duration of a ceremony. And part of the reason I think that's particularly interesting is that the default mode network is really also where we understand ourselves as separate from others, as individuals who we have to protect from others. And it makes evolutionary sense that we would have this part of our brain. It helps us survive. It helps us anticipate potential negative outcomes. But it also limits us in terms of our capacity for empathy, for feeling connected and operating from a place of a consciousness for how something impacts the collective. And I think that we might be coming to a place as a species where we're ready to let down our guard just a bit, to see ourselves ever so slightly less as separate individuals and ever so slightly more as part of a collective, where how something impacts somebody else impacts all of us and it matters to all of us. So spending even just a few hours with a quieted default mode network, I believe has the potential to help us break down that narrow definition of what we are as ourselves as individuals and helps us experience in a felt way feeling connected to the collective.